Today I'm going to tell you about 22-year-old Aisha's story from Gaza, Palestine. She had just given birth to twin boys, her first children, but she faced a heartbreaking reality that no mother should ever have to endure. Due to malnutrition and stress, she could only produce enough milk for one baby. Every feeding time became an impossible choice. Which of her sons would she feed first? And how could a young mother possibly choose between her two precious babies? Imagine being a new mother, holding your twin babies in your arms, but knowing you can only feed one at a time while the other cries from hunger. I know this might be devastating to hear, but imagine if this were your own daughter facing such an unthinkable situation. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel so we can keep sharing these important stories from Palestine. How did Aisha solve this impossible dilemma? And what happened to her twin boys? Stay with me until the end to find out. 22-year-old Aisha Hassan lived in a small apartment in Gaza City, Palestine, with her husband Omar, who was 25 years old and worked as a taxi driver when fuel was available and when the roads were safe enough to travel. They had been married for just over a year, and the pregnancy with twins had been both a blessing and a source of worry for the young couple. Aisha had dreamed of becoming a mother since she was a little girl. She would play with dolls and pretend to feed them, rock them to sleep, and whisper lullabies that her own mother had sung to her. When she discovered she was pregnant with twins, she cried tears of pure joy. "Two babies," she had whispered to Omar. "Allah is blessing us with two beautiful souls." The pregnancy had been difficult from the beginning. Food shortages meant that Aisha often went without proper nutrition, saving the little food they had for Omar so he could maintain his strength to work. She would tell him she wasn't hungry, even when her stomach cramped with emptiness. "The babies need you to be strong so you can provide for us," she would say with a smile that hid her own suffering. During her final trimester, the situation in Gaza had worsened significantly. The stress of constant uncertainty, combined with poor nutrition, had taken a toll on Aisha's body. Her doctor, a kind older woman named Dr. Khadija, had warned her that these conditions might affect her ability to breastfeed. "Your body is under tremendous stress, my dear," Dr. Khadija had explained gently. "We must prepare for all possibilities." On November 10, after 18 hours of labor in Al Ali Hospital, Aisha gave birth to twin boys. The first baby, whom they named Yusuf, weighed just over 5 pounds. The second baby, Hassan, was even smaller at 4.5 pounds. Both babies were healthy but tiny, and they would need frequent feeding to gain the weight necessary for proper development. If this story is touching your heart so far, please give it a like. Can you imagine if your own daughter had to face such an impossible choice between her newborn babies? Let's continue with Layla's incredible journey of motherhood. When Aisha first held her twin sons in her arms, she felt a love so overwhelming that she thought her heart might burst from the intensity of it. Yusuf had dark hair like his father and seemed to have a calm temperament. Hassan was lighter-haired and more active, always moving his tiny fists and making soft gurgling sounds. They were perfect, absolutely perfect, and Aisha couldn't imagine loving anything more than these two precious babies. But within the first 24 hours, the harsh reality of their situation became clear. When feeding time came, Aisha discovered that her milk production was severely limited. The months of stress and malnutrition had affected her body's ability to produce the amount of milk that two hungry babies required. The first time she tried to feed both babies, little Yusuf latched on immediately and fed well. But when she tried to switch to Hassan, there wasn't enough milk left. The tiny baby cried and cried, his small mouth searching desperately for nourishment that simply wasn't there. Aisha's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. She looked down at Hassan, his face red from crying, and then at Yusuf, who was now peacefully sleeping after his feeding. How could she choose? How could any mother be forced to make such an impossible decision? Dr. Khadija came to check on them and immediately understood the situation. "My dear child," she said softly, sitting beside Aisha's hospital bed, "this is not your fault. Your body has been through so much. We need to find a solution." The doctor explained that formula was available, but it was expensive and sometimes difficult to obtain. Clean water for mixing formula was also a concern, as the water supply in Gaza was often unreliable. "Breast milk is always best," Dr. Khadija said, "but we must work with what we have." Omar, who had been pacing the small hospital room, stopped and knelt beside his wife's bed. "We will find a way," he said, taking her hand. "Whatever we need to do, we will make sure both of our sons are healthy and strong." But Aisha could see the worry in her husband's eyes. She knew that their financial situation was already stretched to its limits. Formula was expensive, and Omar's income as a taxi driver was unpredictable. Some days he made enough to buy food and pay for fuel. Other days, there was no work at all. That first night at home, Aisha tried a system of alternating feedings. She would nurse Yusuf for 10 minutes, then switch to Hassan for 10 minutes, then back to Yusuf. But it quickly became clear that neither baby was getting enough nourishment this way. Both boys were crying more frequently, and they weren't gaining weight as they should have been. By the fourth day, Aisha was exhausted and heartbroken. She hadn't slept more than an hour at a time, and the constant sound of her babies crying from hunger was driving her to desperation. She found herself making impossible calculations in her mind. If she fed Yusuf first, Hassan would have to wait and cry. If she fed Hassan first, Yusuf would be the one to suffer. "I'm failing them," she sobbed to her mother, Omar, who had come to help with the babies. What kind of mother can't feed her own children? Her mother, a wise woman who had raised 6 children of her own during difficult times, held her daughter close. "You are not failing anyone," she said firmly. "You are a good mother in an impossible situation. But we need to think beyond what your body can provide." That evening, Omar made a suggestion that would change everything. "In our neighborhood," she said, "there are other mothers with babies. Some of them might have more milk than they need. In our culture, we have always shared what we have with those who need it." The next morning, Omar went from door to door in their neighborhood, explaining Aisha's situation. She wasn't asking for charity, she was asking for the kind of community support that had sustained Palestinian families for generations. The response was overwhelming. Zainab, a 30-year-old mother who lived 3 buildings away, had given birth to her 4th child just 2 weeks before Aisha. Her milk supply was abundant, and she immediately offered to help. "Bring one of the babies to me every few hours," she said. "I have enough for my son and one of hers." Maryam, a 28-year-old teacher who lived down the street, had also recently given birth and was able to contribute. "We are all mothers," she said simply. "When one of us struggles, we all help." Even elderly women in the neighborhood, whose own childbearing days were long behind them, found ways to support Aisha. Tata Khadija, who was in her 70s, began preparing special teas that were traditionally used to help new mothers increase their milk production. "These herbs helped me feed my own 7 children," she said with a knowing smile. Within a week, a beautiful system had emerged. Aisha would nurse one baby while Zainab nursed the other. They would alternate throughout the day, ensuring that both Yusuf and Hassan received the nourishment they needed. Sometimes Maryam would take one of the babies for a feeding, giving both Aisha and Zainab a much-needed break. But the most remarkable thing wasn't just the practical help, it was the community that formed around these 2 tiny babies. The women in the neighborhood began gathering at Aisha's apartment every afternoon, taking turns holding the twins, sharing stories of their own mothering experiences, and offering advice and encouragement. Yusuf and Hassan became the beloved babies of the entire neighborhood. Children would stop by after school to peek at them. Elderly women would bring small gifts, a knitted hat, a soft blanket, a tiny toy that had been lovingly crafted by hand. When will young mothers like Aisha have access to proper nutrition during pregnancy so their bodies can provide for their babies? When will every newborn have the guarantee of adequate nourishment without their mothers having to rely on the kindness of neighbors? Every mother should be able to feed her children without worry, without impossible choices, without depending on miracles from her community. These are basic human rights that should be available to all. 3 months later, both Yusuf and Hassan were thriving. They had gained weight steadily and were meeting all their developmental milestones. Aisha's milk production had also improved, thanks to the traditional remedies from Tata Khadija and the reduced stress of knowing her babies were well fed. But more importantly, Aisha had learned something profound about motherhood and community. "I thought being a good mother meant doing everything myself," she told Dr. Khadija during a checkup visit. "But I've learned that sometimes being a good mother means accepting help and allowing your children to be loved by many people." The network of support that had formed around Yusuf and Hassan had become permanent. Even as the babies grew and needed less frequent feedings, the women continued to gather at Aisha's apartment. They shared childcare responsibilities, cooked meals together, and provided emotional support during the challenging early months of motherhood. Zainab and Aisha had become like sisters. Their children, born just 2 weeks apart, were growing up together like cousins. "Our milk may have brought us together," Zainab said one day while watching the babies play together, "but our friendship will last forever." 6 months after the twins were born, Aisha received an unexpected visit from Dr. Khadija, who brought with her a young medical student who was writing a research paper about community support systems in Gaza. "Your story," Dr. Khadija told Aisha, "has become an example for other new mothers facing similar challenges. The network you and your neighbors created is now being replicated in other neighborhoods throughout Gaza." The medical student interviewed several of the women who had helped with the twins. "We call it the milk sharing circle," explained Zainab. "It's based on our traditional values of community support, but adapted for modern mothers who face unique challenges." Tata Khadija, now considered the grandmother of the entire circle, had the most profound observation. In the old days, families lived close together, and mothers always helped each other feed their babies. Modern life separated us, but these little ones brought us back together. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us how to be a community again. Today, Yusuf and Hassan are healthy, active toddlers who are loved not just by their parents, but by an entire neighborhood of people who helped raise them. They take their first steps in Zainab's living room, say their first words to Maryam, and receive their bedtime lullabies from Tata Khadija. Aisha, now 24, has become a mentor to other young mothers in her neighborhood. When she hears about a woman struggling with breastfeeding, she immediately organizes support. "No mother should face what I faced alone," she says. "We are stronger when we help each other." The milk sharing circle has grown to include over 20 families in their neighborhood. They share not just breast milk, but also childcare, cooking responsibilities, and emotional support. What began as a desperate solution to Aisha's immediate problem has become a model of community resilience and mutual aid. When will the world learn that the solution to individual struggles often lies in collective action and community support? When will societies prioritize the networks of care that allow families to thrive together rather than struggle alone? Every child deserves to be surrounded by a community that will help ensure their well-being. If you believe that no mother should have to choose between feeding one baby or another, if you believe that communities should support their most vulnerable families, please like this video so this story of hope and mutual aid can reach more people. Right now, thousands of people are watching this story. Let's make sure Aisha's message of community strength reaches every corner of the world. Can you imagine if your own daughter had to make impossible choices about feeding her babies? Can you imagine if you had to rely on neighbors' kindness just to keep your children nourished? Think about the support systems in your own community. How many young mothers might be struggling in silence? Every like, every comment shows that mothers like Aisha and babies like Yusuf and Hassan are not forgotten. If you believe that every child deserves adequate nutrition and every mother deserves community support, leave a Palestinian flag emoji in the comments. Subscribe to our channel to show that you stand with communities that refuse to let any family struggle alone. Tomorrow we'll bring you another story that will remind you of the incredible power of people coming together in times of need. Don't miss it. Subscribe so we can continue sharing these important stories of hope, community, and resilience from Palestine. Will you share a prayer for young mothers like Aisha and all the communities that support them in the comments? They need our recognition, our support, and our commitment to building societies where no parent faces impossible choices alone. Show your reaction, let them know that their strength and generosity matter, and that the world believes in the power of community care. Note, the names mentioned in this story have been changed for privacy purposes. This story is inspired by real events experienced by families and communities during times of hardship in Palestine.